Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to the next tutorial in our Boeing 727 by Flight Sim Studios series. This time we are going to taxi to the runway and do the lineup items so that by the end of this tutorial we will be at the takeoff position ready to go. So let's go ahead. First of all, you will notice that there is no prominent ground speed indicator in the Boeing 727 cockpit. But there is one slightly hidden. If you're using a GPS, obviously the GPS is going to give you a ground speed readout. But if you're using the INS, you can also get one by selecting the mode selector down to the track and ground speed indicator. Like this, up here you have your ground speed indication. However, I very much recommend you only to use the ground speed indication to familiarize yourself with how the speed actually feels in the cockpit and then taxi the airplane completely by feeling. So let's go ahead and get rolling. We're going to turn the taxi and the turn off lights on, turn our parking brake off, and then we can get going. The 727 has a rather high idle thrust. You only need a little bit of breakaway power, like this. And when the aircraft is moving at a proper speed, just go back to idle, like now. And you will notice that the aircraft will slowly keep accelerating during our taxi. Now, during the taxi itself, I very much recommend you familiarize yourself with how different speeds feel in the cockpit. Like right now we're doing 10 knots. So remember, this is what 10 knots of speed feel like in the Boeing 727. Likewise, try to remember the place on the panel at which the taxiway center line needs to be so that you are taxiing right on the center line. You can see right now my main wheel, or rather my nose wheel, is located immediately on it, and this is what it looks like. So it just about needs to go through the base of the windshield wipers here. For turns, we should use a maximum speed of 10 knots in order to do turns that are tight, so turns of 30 degrees and more, and up to 15 knots on the apron. Oversteering technique needs to be used. The main wheels are located at the very far end of the aircraft over here, and those need to be centered on the taxiway. For that, you need to oversteer with your flight deck and the nose wheel. Now, the distance between the main wheels and the nose wheel is much greater than, for example, on the 737. For that reason, you also need to use greater oversteering technique in order to keep your airplane on the center line. Normally, you can taxi the 727 with all engines in idle thrust and it will keep accelerating on its own. Let it accelerate until you reach a speed of 30 knots and then slowly break it back down to about 10 knots and let the same process start over again. This way you conserve brake energy and don't heat the brakes up too much. You do not actually have a brake temperature indicator in this aircraft, so you gotta go a little bit by feeling over here, like you need to do for many items in the 727. This is a pilot's airplane, do treat it like it is one. Now as we taxi to the runway, we need to review our takeoff data. Remember, you only have very basic information available in this airplane, so you got to remember a little bit of stuff by heart. Of course, if you're using the GPS for takeoff, then your routing is going to be easy. Even then, however, you still got to remember your takeoff thrust setting and what's going to come afterwards. So make use of the taxi time to review at least the most important data. Now, what would that most important data be? We're going to start very basic over here. Our takeoff thrust setting is an EPR of 2.0. At 1500 AGL, so at 1500 above ground, we're going to reduce thrust to 1.7 EPR, and later on our climb thrust is going to be 1.84. We'll talk about that in the takeoff tutorial. Our takeoff speeds are going to be 132, 132, 140, and the clean speed is 200 knots. Our initial climb pitch is going to be 16 degrees. As a general rule of thumb, if you haven't looked it up because you used the calculator in the clipboard, then around about 15 degrees is going to work. So 10 degrees here, 12.5, 15. But you can look the exact one up in the Flight Sim Studios online documentation. Also review how you are going to fly the SID. So in our case, straight ahead 0.5 or 640 feet, whichever is earlier. Left turn heading 044 until 3 DME on our main DME, and then a left-hand turn to intercept the bearing 257 inbound to Glasgow VOR. So that should be the minimum data that you should review in flight with your, that you should review during the taxi in your Boeing 727. When all of that is done, go ahead and grab the taxi checklist, which you have down here, where you can go over all of that. I'm going to skip that over here because, once again, there's a lot of stuff on here that simply does not match this airplane. For example, it doesn't have a scat fitted down here. So the checklist does not exactly match the airplane. For that reason, I'm going to skip us over all of that. Finally, as we're about to approach our runway, have another look at the flight engineers panel and ensure carefully that the ground flight switch is in the flight position. If it is not, your airplane is not going to pressurize and you will get the cabin altitude warning at 10,000 feet. Again, use ample oversteering as we're making turns over here. Ensure your speed is appropriate. You can cross-check yourself looking down at the INS gauge as I've explained earlier. Okay, we're going to hold short at the runway over here for the moment, and let's just quickly go over the lineup items. So lineup items are rather easy. If the runway is covered with wet snow or slush, be sure to close the cooling doors up here. Not the case today, don't need to worry about that. Make sure that the automatic pack trip is set to the normal position and that flight is selected on the cabin pressure computer. All of that out of the way. For our lineup, we are going to arm our anti-skid, turn on our landing lights and the strobe light, and the transponder goes into the TARA position. So you can just work yourself a little flow on the overhead panel, going from here, down to here, back up to here. If heavy precipitation is expected, so for example, if you have significant rain, then you can turn the continuous ignition on up here on the engine start panel. If no heavy precipitation exists, so if you just have light rain or conditions like we have right now, then continuous ignition is not needed. All of that completed, we can complete our before takeoff checklist that we have done here, and then we can go ahead and line up ourselves on the runway. Now the lineup is going to be the last item we are going to do in this part of the tutorials. Next up is going to be the takeoff, but I will dedicate a separate chapter to that, as the takeoff is rather complex in the Boeing 727. So I would now like to say thank you very much for watching. Hope that you have enjoyed this tutorial. As always, if you liked it, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe to the channel if you're up for the next episode. Thank you very much, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching. Now let's go ahead and complete that lineup, and with all of that, I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.